I am going to call the meeting to order. It's currently 6:33 on Thursday, August 24th, Public Safety Building Committee meeting. First item of business, approval of meeting minutes. So the first set of minutes is July 31st, 2017. These sets of meeting minutes we provided comments on at the last meeting. Mr. Wood circulated a revised version for approval by the committee. I did propose a few grammatical changes to Mr. Wood and also asked that he add a list of the documents that we referenced during our meeting, just to the bottom of the page, which is a requirement of open meeting law. I don't know if anyone else has any other comments on that.
Third time's a charm, then?
Sounds that way. Is there a motion for the meeting minutes from July 31st?
I make the motion to approve them with the changes. I make the motion to approve them with the changes.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries unanimously.
I'll send you that right now. I made those changes,
Excellent.
so I'll put that.
Next item is meeting minutes from our meeting last Thursday night, August 17th. I have a few changes, but I don't know if there's anyone else on the committee that has any proposed changes. So my changes just were mainly grammatical in nature, changing of some last names, some of the Johns. Lemieux and Rooney got mixed up, and Mr. Rooney was not even here. So, and then I also, in requesting that we reference the presentation that was made by Vertex. Kathy, do you have any proposed changes to the August 17th minutes?
No, because I didn't read them.
Do we want to hold the minutes, or do we want to make a motion to move them forward?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Okay, motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Motion's been seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Are you and one abstention? Any opposed? He's an abstention because he wasn't here. Okay. Next order of business is chairman's report. So I know there was a lot of discussion back and forth between Vertex and Context and Town Council. Probably record progress in terms of a contract, but I can inform you that the contract was executed today, sometime this afternoon or a couple minutes ago maybe. Yeah, 3 minutes ago. So with that, I'll officially welcome Context back to working with the town, and we'll give you another chance to reintroduce yourself shortly. In addition, just some updates outside of what we're going to discuss tonight in terms of the meeting schedule is I did make an update presentation to the advisory committee last night. I would summarize the majority of the questions did not directly relate to our project. They related to the other uses of the property, whether it be the continuation of golf course operations, what Woodward was doing, where we are at Choate Field. I plan to send a reminder message to the Board of Selectmen with at least one message, if not any others, from this meeting tonight, reminding them of the recommendation that the Public Safety Study Committee made in and around the June timeframe, that the Choate Field discussions need to begin and need to be finalized so that our designers over the next 10 weeks actually know whether they officially have that 35 feet of buffer that they're, I would assume, still planning to utilize for purposes of access driveways. So while the Board of Selectmen do not have a vote in that matter, I do think that because we report to them, they need to help to streamline those conversations, and I imagine Town Council will need to be involved at some point along the way. So I will re-forward that email with that particular context in mind, but also any other items that come out of tonight. Any questions on any of those particular updates? The other update that I have that will be covered partially by the presentation that's forthcoming from Vertex and Context, that's going to become a mouthful, is I did hear back from the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission that they are both open to having informal discussions with us prior to the formal application period. I think everyone is appreciative of the willingness to team on this effort early in the process. So one of the things we'll be discussing is exactly when to schedule that, but it's going to have to be in September. And, as a product of this meeting tonight, I think we're going to really have to focus on zeroing in on certain dates and committing to a certain set of dates this evening. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to probably a combination of Vertex and Context to maybe walk us through the schedule that you put forth. Everyone received a copy in advance of the meeting. There's a printed copy here. Just walk through your thoughts, where the holes may be, where we're being aggressive, and just anything else you think the committee should be thinking about. And Jeff, probably worth just reintroducing yourself.
Just about to do that. And, well, let me first say thank you very much for having us back. We are very, very excited about this project and have been obviously from the beginning. And really looking forward to getting started and getting through a building. My name is Jeff Shaw. I'm the principal of Context Architecture, and also with me from Context is Ellen Light. She's the project manager for this project in our office. So maybe do you want to introduce yourself too?
John Lemieux, Vertex. J-O-N, thank you.
I'm well aware now, thank you.
So in terms of the schedule, which I think you all have a copy of now, and we have extras here if people need them. This is a draft schedule. It's meant to be reviewed, discussed, modified, but the goal, of course, is to quickly proceed through this process of design, creating bid documents, bid the project, and construction as expeditiously as possible. To do that, we wanted to outline all of the meetings that we think are going to be required by this group, as well as a smaller working group, to get the design completed and get us up to bidding. We also wanted to outline the major regulatory processes we'd go through with Conservation and Planning Board. There are other things that will happen that are not necessarily on this schedule yet. And as we go through, they will be added to the schedule. And there's a bunch of those things that we can talk about, but probably don't necessarily rise to the level of needing to be on the schedule. So the first piece of this is to talk about the process that we're going to go through from now to getting the design finalized, I should say, and the engineering completed to allow us to apply to both Planning Board and the Conservation Commission, because they have a regulatory process that we need to follow, and we will need approved applications from them before going to bid. And ideally, as early as possible, so that we know any implications of their requirements have been included in the design. It's our goal to, as Jason said, involve in some informal meetings with them early. In the prior schematic design process, we did meet with staff for those boards, but we want to also talk to the boards themselves informally to get their feedback and take on the project at this stage before too much has really happened and before we actually submit our applications, because their critical feedback will inform our applications. I'll just go through the schedule, starting at the beginning here with our meeting today. We're hoping to start instituting these working groups on a regular basis to talk about more of the minor aspects of the projects, things that affect the departments, particularly maybe some changes to the layouts. I'm under no illusions that after 9 months of sitting with the drawings that the departments don't have a list of things they'd like to explore, changes maybe, things like that. We will want to do that as quickly as possible so that we can finalize things and really get going on what's called design development. That will hopefully start next week and continue as quickly as possible. And then the 18th of September, and I believe all of these dates are, I'm gonna check here, but I think they're
Same
all
thing.
Mondays. Yeah, I'm gonna have to keep the calendar open because the dates jump around, but most of these dates are Mondays that we would advocate for having our next meeting with this group, building committee. At that meeting, we'd also like to invite, if possible, the Planning, Conservation, and Board of Health to that sort of combined meeting to talk about their informal feedback. At the same time, we're going to give this group an update as to what's happened in the working groups and where things stand. From that meeting, we expect a week later with the working group to start thinking about and hopefully deciding on HVAC systems. At this phase, we need our engineers to start as quickly as possible designing the systems in the building, but we really need the design finalized before we can get to that point. So if we have to, we'll wait to the 25th to select those. Maybe we can select them even earlier than that. That's also the date that we'd be tentatively holding out for, maybe a reserve meeting with the boards. That is also a Monday. Hopefully at that point, will give us a little bit of time before we have to submit our first application to Concom to follow their meeting schedule. Application has to be submitted in advance of their meeting. Hopefully give us time to modify what we need to modify, submit that application, and then on the 12th, which I believe is the Thursday of that week, have another working group meeting and building committee meeting to review progress. Incidentally, our goal is to try and, when we do have two meetings on the same day, is to try to do the working group later in the day so that we can, transition from working group and then come up to this group at your normal time. After that, we'd submit the planning board application. We'd have another working group meeting where we start getting into specifics on the exterior materials and a lot of other things. We'd then expect to have our hearings with both Concom and Planning Board. We'd go through another working group meeting, and at that point, come to the Building Committee for looking for approval to proceed with the first cost estimate. And this cost estimate would be similar to the last one we did, very thorough quantity takeoff style cost estimate. While the cost estimate's ongoing, to keep things moving, we intend to move, with your approval, into what's called construction drawings, which is what we do to create the actual bid documents for the project. The cost estimate usually takes about 3 weeks, so we will come back later in November and review that cost estimate with the working group and also the building committee. Although that doesn't say building committee on there, but I expect that would happen in late November or early December. Then in January, after the holidays, we expect to have another update meeting and proceed with getting approval for the 50% CD's cost estimate. That's our second and final cost estimate for the project before we go to bid. At the same time, assuming everybody's on the same page and happy with the progress, we would look for authorization to start the pre-qualification process, which we can talk about. It's a separate thing, but is going to be required given the magnitude of the cost of the project. That pre-qualification process will start pretty much through January, and then we will review the cost estimate with you in early February, and with your approval, proceed to get bids starting at the very end of February, putting the project out for bid. And then on the second page there, you'll see the bidding schedule, getting bids in hand by the 12th of April, having a meeting to review those bids with you after we've had time to do due diligence on those contractors, although the pre-qualification generally takes care of most of that due diligence, and then hope to award a contract early May and issue a notice to proceed, which essentially is a commencement of construction, and then open the building up 14 to 16 months after that. So roughly, summer 2019. So that's the process, and those are the meeting dates. Now, it's certainly possible, and it does happen fairly with some regularity, that meeting dates will change, and we will have to kind of modify things as new information is received, and maybe schedules need to get modified. But this is our goal, is to work as closely as possible to this schedule. So that's what I have to say about the schedule. I'm happy to take your questions if you want to go into anything more detail. If, John, you want to add anything?
The only thing that I would contemplate is if we're going to review, so the pre-qual package is statutory. There are some specifics in it, but the biggest issue is if anybody, given this schedule here, if we approve it on the 8th, the ad goes in on the 11th, it shows up on the 17th, the responses come out on the 31st. That's only a month before bids are due.
Right.
So in that month, we would have to approve. If by some chance we don't have 2, we have to do it again. So we need a contingency for, if you have less than 3 qualified bidders, either responses or less than 3 after you're done the process. Let's say you kick somebody out for whatever reason. You have to take another shot at getting a 3rd. So you have to go back out to advertise and wait the 2 weeks. You may get nobody else. If you get nobody else and you're left with 2, you, as we talked about last time, I believe, you have the ability to either go with the 2, which I don't recommend, or open it up to just general filed sub-bidders for that category. But statute requires that you make that one additional attempt. So for instance, if we don't get if this building gonna have an elevator? No, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. If the building's gonna have an elevator, if we get no responses, which is very typical, immediately that day, I would place an ad for the next time, but you've got a week lag for the advertisement, and then you've got 2 weeks for the response. So we end up having to build in that extra 3 weeks. So the only thing I would suggest is maybe when we meet in November, if you all, I will have sent you what the package looks like, you can approve it, and you give us the okay to maybe let it out a little bit before Christmas. It's not ideal, but these things are boilerplate for a lot of companies. It's not gonna minimize, I don't think it's gonna minimize people's interest, but just give us the flexibility so that if we need to do those 3 weeks, I don't wanna have to push the bid out because we have to wait 3 more weeks for,
Yeah, the only, and and I would recommend that as well. The only drawback being that if you felt like somehow, I don't expect that, but for some reason we get through the 50% cost estimate, you finally see the numbers and they're not where you want it to be, we may just need to affect the schedule at that point to work on those numbers, which may still ultimately affect the schedule. It won't do anything to the pre-qualification process because those pre-quals will still be good for this project no matter when we go out to bid. Saying you want to start pre-qualifying, you don't necessarily need to have your final cost estimate in. I just tied the 2 together. So that's,
I agree
so
with that.
there's not a big deal of separating those 2, is I guess my point. That it can be done and it's fine.
So John mentioned moving it to right before the holidays. Is there any reason you don't move it like closer to Thanksgiving, based on what you just said, unless I'm...
You can
That-
do the pre-qualification as early as you want, but you need to have documents for the bidders to respond to. So it'd behoove us to do it a little, once we're comfortable that that stuff is where we want it to.
What is the ultimate first time in here that you're going to be comfortable doing that, I guess
We
is the
definitely want to
question.
have the design development set
Yeah,
complete.
because what you need to do for you need to tell them the estimated value of the work.
Right.
Because everybody is applying to this job based upon, and this is a big job, so the electrical package could be $1.5 million, something like that. They're giving you their DCAM certification, which tells you their single project limit. If we're off by a couple $100,000, low, high or low, we may impact somebody who says, "Ooh, I can't apply to this job." So we get So I think your target is right. If this estimate comes out right after Thanksgiving, I would say we go for it right after Thanksgiving. You know, we have those numbers. When we meet at that meeting, we also target this to be the time that you, review the package. I'll get it to you beforehand. You guys can all review it. It's very, again, you have very little flexibility on what you can do to tweak it. But we'll do that in the prior weeks. We'll get that on the schedule too for when I'll send it to you, Jason. You can distribute it to everybody. And you can all have a look at it.
Mr. Rooney?
Yeah, I apologize, but I'm gonna need to take this in baby steps, only because
Okay.
it's a lot of what you said, I don't
Sure.
understand.
Okay.
You talked about the potential of not getting 3 qualified bids. In your experience, given the nature and the scope of the job, what's the likelihood of not getting 3 qualified bids?
So it's not bids, it's bidders.
Bidders,
There's a difference.
okay,
So
yep.
as an example, we are just finishing pre-qualification of a fire headquarters on Nantucket, okay? And I just, 3 weeks ago, got responses in from all the different trades. We only got 2 plumbers, and we got 2 acoustical ceiling installers. Statute says, if you get less than 3, you have to make an attempt to put it back out. The 2 that submitted don't have to resubmit, but it's to try to go get a few more. We did that and got no responses yesterday. Yesterday was the due date. So with 2 pre-qualified firms, we have 2 choices. Either go with the 2, at which point, if one of them drops out and the other one knows it, there is that's terrible for you from a cost standpoint. Or we just open it up to general filed subbids.
Okay.
So once the pre-qualifications are complete, we will send out invitations to bid to those firms.
Okay.
You are a filed subbid electrician on this job. It's a pre-qualified category. We reviewed your information. This is your invitation to bid the Southborough Public Safety Project. We expect the plans to be ready, whatever the date was.
Okay. So that, if I may, Jason, that leads to my second question. When you talked about preparing bid packages, do you have to prepare bid packages for each potential subcontractor? Because you mentioned elevator, you mentioned electrical.
So what we're talking about here is the pre-qualification package. There's one for GCs, there's one for subcontractors. There's just two types. So then filed subbids. And then, once the pool is defined, once the filed subbidders and GCs who have been pre-qualified is defined, we put that list aside. Jeff finishes his work, comes up with biddable construction documents. Once it's ready to go, only those pre-qualified firms in those pre-qualified categories can bid that work.
This sounds like a bureaucratic mess. So we're not allowed just to hire a GC, and then the GC retains the subcontractors.
There is a slight wrinkle, and at the risk of confusing you further, I will bring it up, and that is, there's only certain trades that are filed subbid trades. And then, of course, the general contractor, I forget if it's 11 or 12 or whatever it is, but there's a bunch of trades that you have to file for. There are
Separately.
there are many other trades that are not filed subbid trades, that the GC, in preparing his bid, has the right to go out and solicit prices from whoever he wants.
Site work, drywall.
Okay.
Just simple. those.
So the
Flooring.
GC's price,
Flooring is a filed subtrade.
yeah, to,
The bids, Jeff will complete plans and specs. Those filed subtrades will bid on a given day. They will bid separately. We'll have a pile of painters, we'll have a pile of electricians, we'll have a
Yeah.
pile of HVAC. All those results will be opened. They will all be tabulated, and all those results will be sent to the GC. On bid day for GCs, to pre-qual GCs, let's say we pre-qualified 10 GCs, which would be great. We may only get bids from 8 of them. But on bid day, the final bid day, the day that matters most, the most you're gonna have is 8 to 10 envelopes on the table from that pre-qualified pool. They have taken all of that filed subbid information and written it into their bids.
Yeah, They
The-
can,
the
they can
GCs
choose.
have.
The
yeah.
GCs have. The GCs have the final, they're only, they do not have to go with the low bid.
Okay, so they,
pick.
we will not be in a situation
No.
where a subcontractor has never worked with a GC, or the GC just doesn't like that subcontractor.
You're asking all the great questions.
Is that true? I mean,
Yeah, that can happen because it's a competitive bid process. So if you think of it from the GC's perspective, there might be, 8 painters that he could choose from because there are 8 qualified bids available. They're all at different price points. If he picks the guy that he's worked with and and that guy is, the highest price.
right,
Well, if you're looking at your numbers and putting your bid together, going with the highest painter isn't necessarily the best, isn't gonna put you in the best position to get the
so
lowest.
can you then
bid.
tell the GC to go with a different painter?
No, we can't tell them anything.
You can't tell them anything?
Nope.
Nope.
Public bidding.
They
Can't
have
do
the
it.
right to choose whatever they want, but they have to choose from that list, and it has to be a filed subbidder.
So if we choose a particular GC, say Smith Contracting is gonna be our GC,
He'll be the low bidder.
he'll be the low bidder.
Right.
He has to be.
But in his bid, he'll have a subcontractor for painting, correct?
Correct.
Absolutely. We are not a multi-prime state. Like New York State, there are multiple primes. There's mechanical, electrical,
Right, right.
general. There's multiple, you would hold multiple contracts. Southborough will hold one contract with a GC for a price of $17-ish million to build the building complete.
And part of
One contract.
that price will be contracts that GC will let to filed subbidders that he's picked from these categories.
So we could be stuck with the
And-
highest painting subcontractor if that's the GC that we choose?
But you're not choosing the GC. You're not choosing the GC. You're getting,
But John, as a practical matter, he's not gonna do that, he won't get the bid.
That's right.
So
Okay.
they're not gonna pick
I
a
mean,
lot of high bidders.
practically speaking,
so
most GCs are
competitive.
gonna pick the lowest price subs unless there's some dramatic reason why they can't, or they're excluded from, restricted
and
from.
what the
picking
subs, just to go on that point, the subs can do 2 things on their bid. They can restrict their bid to somebody and say, I'm giving this bid for the Southborough Public Safety Building, but I only want contractor A to use it,
Okay,
which means the bid is useless to anyone else except
Okay.
contractor A. He can also, as a sub, say, I am restricting my bid from, and that's where the dirty laundry gets aired.
in other
So-
words, I don't wanna work
So,
for,
so if contractor B and C, if he's had payment disputes with them and says, I just don't want to work with
Right.
them, he puts that in.
okay,
So that also complicates, bidding. So when we open the filed subbids, it's a great
indicator.
bellwether to see, okay, if in the last estimate, filed subbids were going to be $7 million, and on filed subbid day, we open them and they're 7.2, all right, good, we're trending right along the way the estimate said.
Okay.
Again, anything can happen on GC bid day, but that filed subbid is the first day when you can exhale a little bit and say, all right, we're trending in the right place. So,
I'll just follow along as we go, because I apologize, I'm gonna have some more basic
Don't-
questions.
Well,
no problem. It's
And
it's
I
not meant
guarantee
to
you, we're
be.
gonna go through all this again when we get to November, December, January, when we get close to bidding, because there's a winding and twisty rabbit hole that you can go down with all of these bidding requirements and bidding rules. And that's why I said I don't wanna get too much in the weeds now, because we're gonna
Right.
do this all over again later on.
Jason, I just had a few more questions with regard to the schedule. Can I ask those now, or?
I just want to make sure, are you done with kind of what you wanted to?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll just go right down the table.
Just in terms of housekeeping, are these the dates of our meeting, September 18th, October 12th, or are those just placeholders for now?
I think the easiest way to read the schedule, at least how I read it, is building committee meeting would be a published, open meeting that would follow open meeting laws. So that would be our committee meeting, all of us that are here right now.
Okay, all right,
The working group meeting, which we'll talk about who that will be, but that would be not an open meeting, but that would take place in a smaller subsection where they'd be working out some of the finer details and then these gentlemen would come back and make their presentation.
Okay. My final question relates to the design development stage. Looks like you have 5 separate meetings or times wherein you're going to be discussing design development. You've gone through months and months and months of design development already. Is that correct?
We've gone through what's called schematic design.
Well,
And
what's the
we've-
difference between I hesitate to ask this because I fear it's a long answer, but
Won't
what's
be a
the
long
difference
answer, I
between
promise you, it's
schematic
short.
design and design?
What we've done to date is given our best guess at what this project will look like with a limited amount of time and a limited amount of, budget that we've had to work with it.
But
We
all
have-
of the information.
But all of the information we've developed to this point. The next stage, we're going to be doing a deep dive with engineers, structural, mechanical, plumbing, fire protection, all the engineers. We're going to be involving all of the various other consultants and the town's work that, in terms of extending utilities, doing surveys, doing borings and test pits and percolation tests. We're going to be developing a huge mountain of information that has to be distilled and pushed back into the design. So because that wasn't part of the first phase, because, the interest of the town is not to spend all the money up front just to find out it isn't feasible to do the project. So we do a certain subset that gives us the best information we can to make a decision. Then we move to the next phase, do a lot more work, generate a lot more information, move the drawings and design along to a point where it's far more concrete as to what's going to happen, and therefore the price that we get, the cost estimate we give you at the end of design development is even more detailed than the price at the previous stage.
So the design development phase will be, I assume Vertex works closely with Context during the
So
design
they're-
development. And let me just finish my question. And is that the opportunity, to the extent there would be potential cost savings in this overall project, those will be coming out during the design development stage?
We can handle cost savings at all stages of the project.
Right.
The earliest is the best, because we want to avoid having to redo any work.
Right.
So our goal is to build this, like a pyramid and lay a good foundation so we can put better blocks on it. So our goal is to present information so that you can make the best decision that you need to make. For instance, like selecting HVAC systems. I don't expect all of you to be experts in HVAC systems, but we're going to try and present you digestible information that will help you make a decision about what you want to spend today versus what the town might, see for operating costs, for future costs, so that you can make a decision that will affect the project budget. And we will take that information and then, build it into the design drawings. That'll be the same for all of these pieces of information. We'll do geotechnical testing of the site. It'll suggest a way that the foundation design for this building needs to be created. That may suggest different methods that the foundation can be built with. We'll bring that information back to you. It will have cost implications, and we'll explain what those are so you can make a decision.
I'm just trying to understand the steps here in
So,
terms of the design
An
development.
easy way to think of it is, what you saw through now is basically 2 sheets, maybe 3. You saw our 2 floor plans, a first floor and a second floor, and some exterior elevations. At the end of design development, you'll have about 50 sheets. At the end of construction documents, you'll have over 100. It's just the level of detail
Okay.
has to be, now we have to tell the contractor, it's carpet, it's, it's plaster ceiling, it's plaster walls, as opposed to what you had now was just a square foot price based upon some average cost, dollar per square foot costs for public safety buildings they've done.
Yeah,
Now,
well, I just
out
make
comes
the assumption that because you've been involved for so long with the schematic designs, you have more of an advantage for the design development stage because of the information and the work that you've already done.
That's very true. There is
Okay.
definitely an advantage there. We're building off of everything we've already done, not starting
Right.
backwards and having to build up from that. So I don't expect to have to make new decisions based upon the information,
Got it.
decisions we've already made.
Okay,
We'll just keep going.
thank you, Jason.
Mr. Perry, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
Mr. Wood?
So tagging on Mr. Rooney's question of the chance of, what do you think the chances of us not getting two qualified pre-bidders? You mentioned Nantucket, that's an island. We're not an island, so I'm thinking we're gonna have a better shot of getting more qualified bidders than they did.
Oh, I think you're right with that.
Elevators.
When we did elevators, I could almost guarantee you, I have never recently
Get
seen
one
a bid
bid.
where we've gotten more than one bid
Zero.
on bid day,
Get 1 or 0
1 or 0. Yeah, so,
for pre-qualification.
and bidding sometimes.
And when we do bids, you know, because of the dollar limit of some of the projects we do, we don't have to do pre-qualification, and we just do the straight bidding of filed subbids. Elevator is the one, you know, you either get 0, you get 1. We haven't seen 2 bids for an elevator in 10 years.
So if we don't get 2 bids, we have to, is that something we automatically have to send out, take another 2 weeks to try to
No,
get a
bid-
second bid for?
If you don't get 2 pre-qualification responses, you have to send it out again, to try again. And then if you don't get them, then you can just open it up to general bidding.
Yeah,
Like,
the
as
general
Jeff- as
contractor
Jeff's
can
alluding
go
to.
and solicit elevator prices.
And if on the actual bid day, we don't get an elevator bid, then what we do is, well, can we immediately put it in the GC bid? Or do you have to try it one more
You
time?
have to go and try and get bids, and you
One
probably
more
have to do
time.
it one more time. And then after that, if you still don't get any bids, then you can directly solicit
Right.
prices. You can have the GC incorporate, basically what we do is you instruct the GC to carry a sum, an allowance, in his price, and then he goes out and shops it around to various elevators, comes back with pricing. Essentially, we treat it as a change order
For the
and
difference in.
for the difference
what we
between the
told him to
allowance
carry.
and whatever bid he gets back for the elevator package.
That only happens sometimes. As far as the other categories, I would expect some good interest. Where you are geographically, I think is good. You're gonna get people from Worcester area, you're gonna get people from Boston area, and it's a decent-sized project. So I think there's gonna be some good interest.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's when the pre-qual packages start coming in, if we don't see a lot of responses, that's when we call the people
Yeah,
we both know and say, hey, have you looked at this?
Typically, for whether it's bidding or pre-qualification, we have a list of, you know, between our subcontractors and everything, we've got a list of, 50, 60 names to call. And we'll make all these calls and say, this is coming up, we're doing the project, it's a great project, you should take a look.
I use Nantucket only because it's the one we're doing now. We called a couple of GCs and increased the GC responses from 3 to 6, just by, people just didn't know. The central register, people look at it, they thumb through it, you know, sometimes not very well, and they miss the ad. Nobody reads the newspaper, nobody loses combis, that's my opinion. But a lot of the central register is the place where most of that information comes from. And sometimes people just miss it. So a phone call to say, hey, did you see this, can go a long way.
Thank you.
Ms. Cook?
So my first question is about the cost estimate that your firm's gonna do, the 2, right? The initial one, then the one with the 50% of the construction docs done. So you're gonna do 2, and are you still recommending that we do the one independent outside cost estimation that you had on your spreadsheet, the
Mhm.
12,016?
If you want to do it. yeah.
Right, so we'd have 3 if we did
You would-
that?
Well, you would have, the purpose of ours is to do it when he does his, so that we can compare.
Okay, so
we
you
have
would do it
two
when he did
sets
his
of
first
eyes,
one?
And then we reconcile them. So,
Do you do this internally, or do you hire someone outside
We have a
to?
consultant. Our firm, just so everybody knows, our firm is strictly architects, and then we hire a range of consultants that we always work with for all these projects. And in this case, we would hire a cost estimator. We've actually worked with this cost estimator for about 40 years. So they have a very good understanding of how we do our work, particularly when it comes to, like we were saying, you know, building up the drawings as we go. They can anticipate things that aren't even drawn yet that we would typically have in a project like this. So it usually gives us a very good understanding of what the prices are. Plus, I think using an outside firm who does routinely multiples of these every month, seeing the bids come in, they have a much better understanding of what the market forces, how those forces are playing out in the industry. They can feed that back into their cost estimating much better than if we were doing it in-house.
So basically, 2 similar firms. You would hire yours, or and then you would use yours. So we'd have 2 separate firms doing the same thing, and we could look at it if we wanted to do it. We don't have to
Right.
do it. Okay, now let's look at the schedule for a moment.
Sure.
So part of your schedule is great, part of it's not so great. I thought that we were hoping we were gonna start building in April, and so you've got this in May. And then we thought it was a 16-month construction period, and you've got this at 13 months?
Well, the assumption is that May is the first month of construction, and June essentially is another month of construction, so it's about 14 months, which is what our contract officially says. And I think what I expect happens is during this process, as we get closer to beginning to do pre-qualification, this committee will decide with our recommendations, how long of duration of construction do we actually want to put in the contract documents? Because we have to specify to the contractor how much time he gets, when's the last day he has. Because that's a very important tool during the construction process, and defines really his pricing. So we will have to make a decision collectively how much time we want to do it. And it doesn't matter to me at this date what that end of construction is at this point, because I think once we go further along in this process, we'll have a better understanding of all the logistical aspects that have to be coordinated, everything the contractor is actually going to be doing, as well as other town, projects and things that may impact this project.
So the general contractors that are being asked to bid are gonna be told that it's a 16-month construction period, 15-month, and that's what they're gonna use to base their bid on?
Correct.
And if it's not 16 months, if it's 18 months, what does that mean as far as their price?
That's part of the strategy that we would use as to how we want to develop this price. So one of the things we want to take into account is what season are we bidding the project in, and when does winter fall relative to what we think the likelihood of them closing the building in, because that's a real key mark in a schedule. When are they likely to do most of their site work? In some cases, we will give contractors what we think is extra time if we're bidding it in a weird time of the year. And that extra time helps them maybe, start a little bit later so it's more conducive to doing the work in a more confined period of time. And we actually end up getting better prices from the contractors if you give them that time up front. Ultimately, time is also an impact to the town too. So we can't necessarily say that they can have all the time they want. Because you have to pay consultants, myself and Vertex. You have maybe other costs the town is incurring that have impacts to that schedule. You have maybe commitment dates for furnishings and equipment and starting service for certain things. So we want to be cognizant of all the different factors that play into it. Typically, we would advise about a 16-month construction duration for this size of a project. But I think that, needs to be discussed as we go through this process.
That's what's hard, but again, going back to, we're gonna have a fixed price contract with the general contractor, right? And if we don't make any changes, that's what we should pay, right? Okay, so.
There will be changes.
I'm asking, I'm not, okay. But this is so informal, there's no changes, so that's what we should pay, right? And if we say 16 months, right, and it turns out to be 18 months through no fault of his, whatever, we delayed it, we did make a
Yep.
decision, then does that change, does he have the ability to go in and change that fixed price contract because of
No,
that?
he has the ability to file a claim with us for the extended time he was on the job and what that cost was. So the building technically shouldn't cost him any more if everything's been procured. What costs him more is his general conditions, his management, his superintendent, a piece of the home office overhead, the trailers, all of the things, the contractor's infrastructure to build the project. That's usually what they come after you for. Conversely, if they finish early, they're not gonna give you the money back.
Right.
That's how they put money in their pocket. If there are contractors we've worked with that like to hit a job hard, if they can give you the job a month early, they look like a hero, and they've saved themselves money. And it's pure profit, goes right to the bottom line, so.
Yeah, there are contractual clauses that will be built into the contract that the state allows, what's called liquidated damages. And, we will have a discussion as to what the amount of those are, which if the contractor does go over and there was no extenuating circumstances to cause him to do that, that we've legitimately extended his contract for, like John's saying, paid him his portion, the town would have the right to require them to pay those liquidated damages, which is typically a daily amount. And, you know, that's a tool in our tool bag. It's one of the more blunt force tools that we have to use, and it usually creates very adversarial relationships, so we use it when we need to. But there are protections that cover the schedule that would be built into the contract.
Because really, the damages that you're not paying rent right now, you're in a, or I guess the question would be, we need to see how the schedule lays out against your deadline.
Right.
You know, and that dropout deadline when you need to be out of there by.
Yeah, and you would, like I said earlier, you would end up having to pay us and John more money to work
So
more
there,
months on the job.
the
and
biggest thing is
every
those
cost.
damages have to be grounded in some reality. You can't say $2,000 a day. For what? You know, you need to do an honest calculation of what your costs would be if we're late. And sometimes there can be tiers, you know, so let's say the finished date of the job is X, but 3 months from there is the date at which you have to be done and have all of this turned over, you know, your 3-year clock. Let's say it's 3 months from them. I know the math isn't working. But you can have one LD for the first date, and then after the second date, that
Ratchets
number
it
could
up.
really ratchet up. So we've worked on projects where there's been 5 different LD clauses because there's phases that have their own, and they compile on top of each other. So again, there's all sorts of things we can do, but, you know, that will be a discussion with all of you as we get closer to say, okay, what's that number gonna be, and what's our reasoning behind it? Because the flip side is, you can scare somebody away, or they will put all of the money that they're afraid of in their bid. And suddenly you're like, why is this high? Well, it's because they carried $60,000 of liquidated damages to cover themselves for 2 months. So it's a game. It's a little bit of strategy, but as we get closer, we'll be able to better define it.
Okay,
Closer to signing a contract with the contractor.
Well,
with the
to going
GC.
out to bid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bid-
because
bid
those
documents.
clauses have to be intact when we go out to bid.
Right, to all the pile of GCs.
Right.
So we need to know that.
Because we would assess it against, if we did against the GC, but if it's the plumber's fault,
Right.
we don't assess against the plumber, the GC would
Soon.
Have to pass that down.
would have to pass that down and deal with it.
I just have a couple comments, really. I'm a fan of moving up the pre-quals to get everybody qualified. It's in December and the holidays, but I'd rather get that rolling earlier. So I'm a fan of moving it up, right?
Okay.
Where we can save money is going to be on the decision-making throughout all the design development. So as the committee are feeding you guys decisions, that we stick with those decisions. So I think it's very important that we all are comfortable with being knowledgeable about what we're being asked. So that somewhere down CDs, we're not saying, hey, let's flip the Sally board or put it on this side, because we just want to keep these guys moving forward and not moving back. But something you said then, Jeff, about seasonality and everything, something I want, I guess, us in the town to know about that we haven't quite addressed, you keep bringing up, is we're going to be digging, if we go by the book here, we're digging in May, June, and we've said we don't want golf to be down. So we're talking about doing a lot of the work to the site, I think at high golf time, but a lot of that has to be done. It's all new, right? The golf is, of course, is what it is, but I think that we have to really understand what we're doing with the golf course to work with this schedule as well. And I don't know, I don't have the answer, but we've got to tackle it at some point, because the seasonality thing is a big deal for the golf course.
Sure, absolutely. At the risk of, again, getting into the weeds, one thing I'll just throw out there is the possibility, if the regulatory work goes smoothly, that, you know, it's a possibility that we could try to, you know, change the procurement method. Go to a CM and do an early release package. Or,
You don't even have, you know what, you could do that. You don't even have to, though. You could do an early site package, just design, bid, build.
Yeah, but the construction will
Take-
still be ongoing, though. You can't play golf through it, so.
we have one GC.
Well, but we can move if we can move the
We did it until.
early site up
Do it.
in the calendar year, December, January,
Well, I trust you.
we've got a shot at doing it when
Yeah.
golf
Yeah.
is down.
It's
Yeah, so the goal being is you have the site work done to the extent that you would be affecting golf, and then that would be out of the way, done early, and then when you're releasing the general contractor for the building, they would go in and just use the previous work that the other guy had prepared and just go off from there, and you wouldn't have to wait as long.
Right.
And typically, because of the way the engineering has to happen for the regulatory packages, a good chunk of what they have to do engineering-wise is done for the application. We get their comments, we feed them into the design, and then the engineer just has to finish his specifications and construction drawings. So the site work package actually can come along faster than the rest of the building.
We should look at that.
And that may be a real solution here.
Because then if we can put golf aside and done, grass is growing, the green's done, the tee's done by April, I think we could feel good about ourselves, and then the building can come along.
Even if they had temporary holes set up, so it's functioning during construction with a
But-
temporary hole.
But that's gonna have to happen.
That's where the interface with that other committee is
Yeah.
gonna be important, because what can you live with, what can't you live with? Because, you know, Jeff could get, once we know what the building looks like, we could have a site package pretty, I don't wanna say pretty early, I'm not
Pretty
gonna rush
quickly,
you.
right.
But the reality is, what are you doing? You're digging, getting into
You
grade,
know, at a
you know.
minimum, the septic field could be finalized, laid out, dug, and finished, and then we're out of that side of the site.
So, yeah, I don't wanna get too much in the weeds either, but that's
Just to
a big
think about
unknown
it.
that we haven't solved.
Absolutely.
That's all.
Scribney?
Do we have to, at what point in the schedule do we even have to pick a clerk of the works, or is
That's us.
that's you guys? So
Yep.
we picked you, it's not a
You're
third?
done. Nope, you're done.
Okay.
We'll tell you who the person is as we get closer. We're gonna let you meet them. But, no, we're good to go.
So, okay.
Yep.
Do you know what that's gonna be yet? Do you know who that person's gonna be yet?
No.
Okay. When construction starts, that's when that's when it'll be active? Okay.
So once we know we're drilling down within, let's say within a couple months of before we start, you know, after the holidays.
Okay.
Then we'll know exactly where the schedule is, and we'll go with that.
Mr. Lyons?
No questions at all.
So I had a few questions, comments. So, John, going back to our meeting last week, you mentioned a 2-week time period where Vertex needed some time, and that's where you thought you, as a firm, may be able to help
Yep.
us identify savings. Where is that on the schedule?
So basically, every time Jeff has a stopping point for an estimate, that's when we'll do it. That's when we do our constructability review. That's when we're doing our, you know, constructability, buildability review, and we'll get comments back to them. Once the estimate comes back, that's if the estimate is trending higher than the budget, that's when we all sit down and say, okay, what do we have to look at? You know, what do we have to change? But we, you know, along the lines of, you're going to make some big decisions when you talk about HVAC systems and those type of things. That's your first input. But until we start getting some feedback back from the cost estimator, you know, Jeff is designing a standard fire station. I want to say, I don't mean standard fire and police station. You know, what's the market doing, you know, in design? He's not, you know, he's giving you a good, solid building at that point. Now, are we talking about radiant heat? You know, we'll have the discussion about radiant heat in the apparatus-based lab. Are we going to do it? A couple $100,000. It's great to have. A lot of the stations we're doing have it, but it's a couple $100,000. So those are the kind of things that we'll talk about along the way. If at either of those checkpoints, preferably DD, because once you're at CD and you're halfway through, it's a little late to start changing things. You know, we need to get a good feel from the DD to make sure that we're trending in the right way.
The goal would be to have all major decisions made and incorporated into the DD estimate. And that's not to say that, you know, at the end of November, when we're looking at that estimate, that day we have to make all the changes, but within, you know, a week or two of that date, we can go back and forth with the cost estimator and John's people and, you know, come up with a package that we all feel represents our best effort at DD with a cost on it, And then the goal is to do a construction drawings estimate that is a check on that DD estimate to make sure that we're not really radically changing stuff too much. And that, you know, the promised savings that we all came up with at DD are actually materializing in the finished or close to finished documents. Because the last thing you want to do is change a bunch of major things in the CD phase and then essentially be crossing your fingers that the bids are going to come in like you've predicted in the cost estimate. So, you know, I'd like to push as much of those decisions up into the November, early December timeframe.
So, I don't know if you meant to say it this way, but I just want to be clear. You mentioned something about if Jeff was, if everything came back and both cost estimators are coming in high.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if they're coming in below what we thought it was gonna be, I think we expect those sorts of items to be aired out as potential options, right? And then
Absolutely.
that's where we're gonna defer to the chiefs as well to make sure that that's not impacting the
Right,
functionality of
that's
the
the- that's
facilities,
the-
but,
That's the need-want discussion, you
Yeah.
know, to make sure that, are all the needs taken care of? Okay, what are some of the wants? You know, do you need, use radiant heating again? Do you need it? No, you don't need it. They haven't had it for years. The trend now, though, is to put it into stations. Let's have the discussion. You know, that's at that point, you know, that's because kind of after DD, we don't want to be making any more of those big decisions. Systems need to be locked in. You know, we can talk about the surfaces you're going to have on the kitchen counters, you know, but now you're talking nickels instead of dollars. So it's, you know, there'll be a lot of discussion through this process about longevity versus, you know, lower upfront cost. you
The
know.
other strategy we're both going to look at, of course, is developing bid alternates so that there's some flexibility at bid day because the town has a finite amount of money for the project. We want to make sure that you get what you need, but certainly things, I mean, I keep harping on the radiant slab, but maybe that becomes a bid alternate. And, you know, it's still a want, but it's not necessarily looking like it could fit in the budget during our cost estimating phases. So we might put that in as an alternate, see what the prices come back like. And at bid day or award day, you can decide, are we taking that alternate or not? And there's a strategy to that if we have multiple alternates, but, you know, that's another tool we have during the cost estimating process to make sure that we're getting where we need to be. And just like John said, you know, we would be doing a lot of hard work to make sure the needs are absolutely being met, but that maybe the wants end up becoming some alternatives that you have to maximize your value at bid day.
in terms of the meeting schedule, you said November 27th. That sounded more like a committee meeting and not
know,
just a working group meeting, or would?
It's exactly right. As I was reading it off, I realized I didn't have a date in here where the building committee actually looked at the cost estimate. So I think the 27th is really a building committee meeting day as well. I made a note here to change the schedule and add it in.
And then in terms of the conservation and planning, I don't know if you did this on purpose or by accident, those are actually hearing dates that have been scheduled?
Yeah,
Did
it on purpose.
We want those.
The conservation and planning boards actually have meetings scheduled for those nights. I think it's important to highlight, we're not on their official agendas
Right.
yet, but I think
Gonna have to try to.
we want to make sure that
Yeah. And
we are
again,
on those agendas, so.
I did
to the
take the
extent you
liberty
can-
of saying we're only going to have 2 hearings. Now, the question is there only 2 or is there more? And that's what we're going to hope to learn in some of the informal meetings and at the beginning to try and figure that out. But, you know, we do need to get that started ASAP because we want that put to bed as soon as possible in the process. So we're committed with what we need to be.
And I had 2 comments. One was, you know, I know there's going to be these working group meetings, and most of us sat here and voted over the course of 2 to 3 years on space needs. So it's just one of 9. I would just like to emphasize we really should not be revisiting any of those space needs. That's what we presented to the town. I know the chiefs were heavily involved. We have the same chiefs, you know. So I think we really need to be focused on, you know, what it takes to, you know, put this building up and what obstacles we don't know about, as opposed to reinventing the wheel on the items that we spent a lot of time.
I
And
think a
that-
big chunk of it will be moving the boxes. I think we talked a little bit about that last meeting, you know, not liking where something is laid out right now, not changing the side of it. In fact, what I said to one of the guys is, you know, if you're moving boxes around, take one of the plans, cut it up. You know, move the day room around, you know, that kind of stuff, you know, you have an idea of what size the box is right now. And if you're concerned about flow or where the hallway is or access, you know, that's what's gonna happen. But I agree with you, the program should be locked in at this point, because the program ties to a price, ties to a budget for money you already got. We can't grow square footage.
My goal is to make it smaller.
Yeah, no one is,
you
no
go.
one is going to argue
Not-
if you
not
come
this-
back
not the-
with,
I should clarify that. Not the net space, the actual program space, but the efficiency of the design, to make the whole building a little bit tighter, a little bit more efficient, make it work a little bit better. Take suggestions, which I have not heard yet, but I know they're out there, I'm sure, of reconfiguring things as a challenge to make it actually work better than
Yeah.
what we've done in the previous phase.
and I think the one thing you have the benefit of is you were at almost every one of our public meetings where you heard varying views, pro and con to the project, you know, that we were facing prior to town meeting, so encourage you to brush off some of those notes, and if we can make any, you know, changes, great, but I think I would like to at least reinforce, and if anyone else wants to reinforce it, you know, the functionality of the facility's gotta work, but we don't need to go reinvent the wheel. Mr. Rooney?
I made the assumption that my question that I'm about to ask is more of in the weeds type of a question, better reserved for a later date. But given Mr. Moorhead's questions relative to the golf course committee, I know when we were interviewing Vertex, we certainly made it clear to them that the success of this project at town meeting was a combined effort, not just of the public safety facility building, but also the remainder of the land and the continuation of the golf course. My question, I'm hopefully I'm gonna be able to ask it in such a way that you can just respond either yes or no rather than a long narrative. But when you send out your bid documents, or you are receiving the bid documents in from the GCs, will there be specific areas that they will address relative to the continued operation of the golf course? And the reason I ask that is that there's been no money allocated by town meeting for golf course construction independent activities. However, the GC should be aware of that sentiment or that environment within which the GC is going to be operating. So again, my question is, when you send out, these obviously cannot be a boilerplate type of bid documents that go out there, but it needs to be customized in such a way that addresses those golf course concerns. Is that something that you anticipate doing, or I assume you haven't done it before, but will you do it in this instance?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So, final comment, and this probably goes without saying, is I think Mr. Moorhead's point was excellent, and Mr. Rooney will be able to take that back as the representative to the golf course committee that we're thinking about it, and hopefully light a fire under them to make some decisions as they need to as well. But to the extent we can move any of these dates forward, we need to be working feverishly to do that, because I think we all know that there may be some obstacles, whether it's the sub-bid process, the GC bid, there's a lot of unknowns, right?
Just planning board saying,
Right.
well, we'll close it next time. You just added a week or
Right.
two to your, you know.
And that's where we're hoping
Right.
some of this outreach ahead of time will help us in that. But, you know, as you look at this schedule, I don't know that anyone up here is going to argue if you start moving dates forward. I think there will be a lot of people yelling, myself included, if these dates start to slip for reasons that we can control. There will be things that we can't control, and I think we're all reasonable people, but I think I just wanted to be clear, this is our kickoff meeting, that I think that's the expectation from this committee. Just hearing some of the questions tonight, and a lot of us haven't gone through a full public building process, I was just wondering if you could just, maybe looking forward to the next full committee meeting, what sort of things, and it can be high level, just 2-3 minutes of what you would actually be bringing forward to us, just so that we know, what to expect, and then we maybe do this every time, just so we kind of have it heads up. That's what Jeff did with us during the schematic design he said, all right, we're gonna look at where the building's going on 60 acres of land, and then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, we were rearranging where the apparatus space went. So I don't know if you can just give us maybe some high-level highlights of
Next
where you
meeting
think we're going.
is, next meeting with this group is to look at what changes were made between schematic design that's done and in the books and what we're going to work with now. And between then and now, we're going to hopefully get those comments, discuss, work diligently with the working group and the chiefs to be able to come to that September 18th meeting and actually present, hopefully, final changes. If it's not final, then hopefully it'll be close to final, because our goal is to move on beyond that and really get into the details. The other thing we'll be doing is going over and giving a good overview of what we see as the planning, conservation, Board of Health type of issues, because they'll be part of the meeting, and ultimately we'd like to use that meeting to get from them all of their concerns, comments, things they'd like to see as part of the project, and probably have a discussion about possibilities with them. So those are the two big pieces I see for our next meeting. If we should happen to be so advanced that we could actually even come and talk about, initially start talking about HVAC systems, that would be great, because that would just help speed up the process. I think there's a lot of work to do between now and September 18th. I'm not sure that that's realistic to say HVAC would be part of it, but that's potentially, out there. So those are the two pieces I see us working on.
Mr. Goodney?
I know we mentioned about the golf course, making a notation. We also have to keep in mind the school.
Right.
And it's my understanding the septic goes through there, so obviously, we can't deal with that with school in session. And
Yeah,
we
if
have to
we.
take precautions for the kids.
If we do an approach, which again, I didn't want to, we could certainly have a big discussion about it, it's fine with me, but if we did push that sidewalk up early and try to get that septic system built, my intention was not necessarily to actually put it online with the school until the school was done, and then the school would be plugged in over the summer. But at least they don't have to go into the septic field to do it. They could run the pipe all the way out to the pump station, which is on school property, and not have to worry about, during the summer, going out into the golf course and actually digging up anything. So we're trying to coordinate that so it wouldn't affect the school activities. And of course, during the building construction, since we're right proximate to the school, as Mr. Rooney also said, there'll be things in the bid documents that describe to the contractor what the requirements are for building this project in this particular location. What areas of land can they use, what is within their scope of work, and what is outside and they're prevented from using. There'll be hours of operations and noise and all the other stuff that's part of this process.
And just a logistical question on that next meeting. I assume you would prefer that we have the Planning, Conservation, Board of Health discussion at the beginning of the meeting, and then allow you to make your presentation of everything you've done?
Seems to be a good
Okay.
process.
Are there any other further questions for these two gentlemen? I am going to talk about whether these dates actually work for people in a second, but are there any specific questions on anything they've outlined thus far?
Well, let's remind them of one more thing, since we're talking about all the ancillary things. You know that Southborough's about to undertake a really significant road project, too,
Yes.
that starts at exactly the same time, too, so just
Right.
make sure. Okay, so you know about that one, too, okay.
Yeah, there will, as you say, there will have to be coordination and close attention paid in our planning process as to how we conceive of this project moving forward. But then, of course, in the bid documents, we would make the contractor aware of the limitations. So we wouldn't, the last thing we want to do is have a change order because of something we already knew about happening. And the contractor's saying, well, I can't get my trucks in because there's only one road and the traffic there, and so I'm limited in how much I can do during a day, and so that's extra cost for the town. We want that upfront spelled out, so that their bids have to incorporate it.
In one of the things I already asked Mr. Purple to coordinate was having the DPW director come to the working group meeting so that they could talk about all the utility issues that we are well aware of from the last go-around, and then have them come in to a public meeting similar to what we're doing with planning, just so that they're on record with what their schedule looks like, so that we're now coinciding with them. All right, so do we want to look at least the September and October dates to make sure there are no major issues or quorum issues? So we're only looking at the building committee meeting dates, and then I'll come back to how we're gonna handle the working group. So, next meeting would be September 18th, which is a Monday night. Are there any objections to that evening? Okay. September 25th most likely will not be a committee meeting, but we are gonna hold it as a potential backup should planning, conservation, or Board of Health not be able to make it on the 18th. So are there any objections to holding the 25th for now, the following Monday night? Thursday, October 12th, any objections? And then Thursday, November 2nd. Mr. Rooney.
I am unavailable on the 2nd. I am unavailable that week. I have a trial in Nevada, of all places.
So that is an important meeting.
That's
Right.
likely the meeting that we'll be doing the pre-qualification, approval to start pre-qualification. It'll be approval to begin the cost estimate and approval to begin the CD phase. Essentially, it's the last design development meeting. I think the more important meeting is to hear the results of the cost estimate, frankly.
Which is the 27th,
Yes,
November 27th.
yes,
Um,
it's the week after Thanksgiving.
And you will not be ready earlier than November 2nd for that, or you wouldn't be willing to commit to that based on?
Yeah, I can't commit to it yet. The earliest would be potentially the week before Thanksgiving for the rest.
Sorry, I'm talking about the November 2nd meeting.
I know. The November 2nd meeting is likely not going to be able to be any earlier than
Okay.
that.
What's our DD date that we're talking about?
For finishing
Yeah.
is it? Finishing DD currently is November 2nd. That's the date.
So my suggestion on that date is let's keep that in mind, that we have potential conflict. If we're ready earlier, we'll move it up, but I don't think we want to move that back. Is that correct?
Don't move it back. No, let's keep it, like I said, I think the more important meeting is the actual review of the cost estimate.
'Kay.
Finishing DD is more about how we are responding to all of the various pieces of information that have come up. Are we ready to actually cut the cord and move into CDs? Is the department's happy with everything that we've been doing inside the building on the details? Are we ready to actually start the pre-qualification process? It's some decision-making, but I think the real meat of it comes in when we actually review the cost estimate data.
And then I'll stop at the November 27th date. That's gonna be the last one I'm gonna ask for availability at this point, given it's a couple months away. Any issues with that one? All right, and Mr. Rooney, if we do go with the 2nd, I know you'll be in a different time zone, it sounds like, but you could dial into that one if we had a quorum here. Up to you to think about over the next couple of months.
Yeah, it's 3 hours different, Las Vegas, so my trial ends at 4 o'clock there, so the earliest I could would be 7:30 our time.
Okay, so we'll coordinate as we get closer. Lives change over time too, right? So we might have some conflicts that come up. Okay, so we have essentially our meeting dates for September, October, and November. So Jeff has also outlined working group meetings, which is essentially a much smaller group. At the last meeting, I asked for any volunteers from this committee that would be willing to kind of sit in on those meetings. Obviously, you're able to offer any, advice as you're going through the meetings, but really it's just as eyes and ears of the town, you know, especially police and fire experience to just vet everything that's going on in the room and be able to, you know, nod your head that everything is working the way it should. So a lot of you approached me. A lot of you told me basically what your schedule looks like over the next, I feel like I know everyone's schedule now after some of those conversations. But what I've decided to do is ask Mr. Lyons and Mr. Wood to attend those meetings. One happens to have police experience, one happens to have fire experience. They didn't present me with any schedule limitations, so I just, in respect to the folks that said they had limitations on certain dates, I didn't want to ask Jeff to move any of these dates, so I kind of went with police, fire representation, and scheduling conflicts. So I just asked that when you're all coordinating your schedules, you just let these gentlemen know. And then I, as the chair, will attend as I see fit, but I am not going to hold up your schedule at all. I think the important thing to just remember of what the difference is between working group and building committee is no decisions should be made in the working group meeting that impact the overall cost of the project. Those would be brought back by your respective firms to us for all 9 members to make a determination on. It's really mainly to go through, cut the floor plan up, move it around, hear the concerns of the chiefs, hear the concerns of their respective department employees, and react to those accordingly. Mr. Rooney?
In terms of the working group, don't we want to give them the authority to agree to changes in the design such that those changes result in cost savings as opposed to cost increases? My concern is this. I assume that you're going to have a number of items that are going to need decisions by the town. If all of those decisions have to wait to come before this board, that's going to slow the process down. So I was thinking that the working group would have more authority, Jason, than what you just indicated that they would have. That's the reason for my concern.
We tiptoe the open meeting law a little bit, even though there won't be a quorum present, you know, for certain points of deliberation. So what I would suggest we do, I think it's a valid point, but I think we can resolve that here and now, is if anyone wants to make a motion that, you know, they have the authority of the committee. If the chiefs agree to functionality, that it'll work and it's going to save the town cost, I mean, that just sounds to me like a no-brainer. Like, I don't know that they need anyone to nod their head and say, yes, if the chiefs are saying it works and it's saving the town money on, you know, say we're changing out the flooring, you know, and it's a less expensive flooring and that's what the chiefs actually want than what we had originally costed out.
But how would they know that? How would you know for sure whether it's more or less? You don't have a detailed budget right now I mean, you've got a per square foot. So how would you know for sure whether a change is going to be more or less than what that per square foot number envisioned?
We may not know exactly, but I think we would have a strong indication of whether it was raising the price or lowering the price or keeping it approximately the same.
Okay.
So that's about as probably as, I don't know, as good as we could give you at the time. You know, it's possible, you know, if we had a working group meeting right around the time that we released the cost estimate, we might actually be able to tell you with more precision, but generally it'll be an approximate number.
And I think if you look at the working group meetings, they actually occur like they'll happen like three or so hours before our meetings. So I think if there's any debate, they're going to be meeting with us 3 hours later, and they would be able to get that resolution that evening.
We're not going to hold them up that way then, which is.
That's what I'm thinking, because I had asked Jeff why you were doing the meetings on the same date, and it's just practicality of actually coming out and spending the time and really devoting their time to Southborough on those given days as opposed to their other
Yeah, the way I
projects.
saw this working is that the building committee met roughly monthly to process the financial issues of the project, the image issues of the project, making sure it's on track, and the logistics, and making sure the goals of the town are being met. And the working group meeting regularly, every couple of weeks, or maybe even, some ad hoc meetings where we have to, wrestle some issues to the ground. So maybe we come out in a random day to come meet with chiefs and people that can meet that day that may not show up on this schedule, that get the process of the project, the work of the project really done, so that we can come to those monthly meetings with information that everybody supports, or agreed upon. So there will be some working group meetings that won't be paired with a building committee meeting, but the goal is to come back on a regular basis here and get those decisions validated. And again, whether it's giving them the authority to do cost savings decisions, that's great. I'm all for giving a little bit more authority to the working group just to keep things moving more smoothly. But that, I think, is my plan.
I mean, let me clarify. I mean, you're professionals. We hired an owner's project manager. By statute, we're required to, right? I think you need to bring us your best professional opinion of the things. I think my purpose of appointing members of this committee was just to act as the eyes and ears to validate that the process was working for those that are paying for it, as opposed to, just saying that folks are working in the background and not.
Yeah, and to Jeff's point, I mean, there may be a day where the meeting is fire-centric, there's a day when it's police-centric, there's a day when it's communications, when it's gonna be a whole different, it's gonna be town vendors and their radio vendors and, trying to put all those pieces together. So there's gonna be a lot more working group meetings than what's on here. There has to be. We can't just do this with a half dozen meetings. It's gonna be more than that.
And that's what Jeff was doing the one thing, right, with the Public Safety Study Committee is, you tell me how many meetings you had, but I feel like you were always talking to the chiefs and the town administrator and their respective departments, just trying to figure out the space needs, right? So it's just the different sorts of discussions, and now we have the
more
added
detail.
layer of
It's
an
more
owner's
detail.
project manager.
Yep.
Mr. Rooney?
I just don't want to give this working group no authority to make decisions, because you've mentioned that not only will there be the working group meetings as identified in this document, but there's going to be many more. So I make the assumption that the working group is going to have to make decisions, and that's the reason for the working group.
I think we're gonna be making decisions based on the budget, like we're working within the budget that we're there. So what I would say is, it's new to a lot of people. Let's have the first one. Let's have the first committee meeting following and kind of see where the flavor of the working group is going to say, okay, we're gonna need to talk about A, B, and C, and get your thoughts at the next meeting about, all right, what are your thoughts? Is this something you want us to just talk about and decide, or is this something that you want feedback on? And I think we can kind of feel our way through the first few until we get a flow going.
Jeff, let me ask you, in terms of your experience of a working group or some group that meets more regularly than this committee, is it your experience that that working group has the authority to make various decisions on behalf of the town?
Yeah, most of the time they're making decisions about their departmental needs, finishes that they'd like to see in the building, equipment, appliances. But to John's point, in my experience, they're working within budgets. They're
Yeah,
working within the
okay.
budget that's been
All right.
identified. They're not spending.
Just didn't want to
money.
handicap them, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna have to do some judgment of things that have to come forward versus just
Okay.
are inherent in what we've already approved. I'm just mostly concerned about the appointed members up here, not necessarily what all of you
Right.
are doing. I think that's what I'm trying to draw the line. Yeah.
My experience working with Jeff and Ellen in the past is you're looking for sharing wet walls. You're looking for sharing, different facets, so it is more efficient, that you're not running plumbing from one side of the building to the other if it's not needed. I mean, that's decisions we were making, like in that committee.
Mr. Wood?
How much notice will we have, like, for time and location on these meetings? Would I get like a half a day?
As much as I can give you. Most of the time, and this is kind of what happened in the first phases of this project. Most of the time, they're known well in advance. We'll give you a time, the week ahead of time, saying, we think we need another meeting next week. What are your availability? What's the chief's availability? And we figure it out.
We'll talk work group to work group.
Yeah, there were a few times, and I expect there'll be a few times here, where all of a sudden, some squirrely issue will show up, And because of where we are in the schedule, we need to tackle it and wrestle it down. And I think, you know, that might be, can we have a phone conversation this afternoon, everybody dial in and try to talk about it and come to some agreement so that it doesn't keep spinning around. And those things did happen in the last phase. It was more town administrator and the chiefs and I and trying to resolve some things with the program, but they were useful meetings, well worth the fact that we did have a last minute thing, but oftentimes those even happened over the phone, you know, emailed out some documents and had it over the phone and did it more last minute. There won't be a lot
Unfortunately,
of
my
those.
office is only 3 miles down the road, and I can bounce my schedule around pretty quick, so if I even had just a few hours' notice, just,
Yeah. Yeah, usually,
So-
and then, yeah, that's rare, but that probably will happen at least once on this
well, I'm
project.
sure.
But they're also producing, you guys are producing for these working meetings for you guys to
Yeah.
look at and
Yeah.
judge on, so there's enough time in
And that's
advance to-
essentially why we didn't populate it with, you know,
Every week.
50 different working group meetings, because there wouldn't be enough time left for us to actually do the work. We needed a certain amount of time between meetings to actually produce something. So there will be, as John's saying, many more that don't show up here, but, you know, we want to restrict, you know, to appropriate times.
There, any other business anyone wants to conduct this evening?
I just, at the last meeting, you pointed out, I think, a obligation that the town has to supply to members to review some of the bidders.
Pre-qualification.
Pre-qualification,
Yep.
and
We
that
don't have
was,
to- We don't have to do that now.
It's in the
but
winter.
is that part of what this working group would
No.
take that task? That's gonna
Totally
be
separate.
another working group?
Totally separate.
That will have formal discussion and make a motion from this committee.
And I'll have the whole packet for you to look at in advance so you can see it with the differences between the two.
Have as many members on it as we can.
4.
Anything further? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made and seconded, all in favor? All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.